What's your greatest, most satisfying, I freaking called it moment? Told her that a mutual friend was in love with her. We were all on holiday and like 5 of us rented an apartment. Guy brought her breakfast in bed for Christ's sake. Kept making her tea and crap. Months later, he messaged me begging to get her to talk to him. How she was his rock, or they were telling each other I love you. I called her, freaking out. She said they were like brother and sister. Wouldn't talk to him though, even though I asked her multiple times. Wanna guess how that story ended? You're right. She had previously fooled around with one of my best friends, weeks before we got together, and hid it from me, and was definitely having an emotional affair with a breakfast guy. Oh, I can smell a villain backstory brewing. Story 2. When I was in 6th grade, I became friends with a couple other girls in my neighborhood. We each had completely different backgrounds, but we just clicked. For years, we 3 did all things good friends do. The only thing I, personally, didn't like was to stay over at the house of one of these girls. I'll call her Brianna. I'd sleep over at the other girl's house. They could sleep in mine, but I always came up with an excuse not to stay at Brianna's. She started to get her feelings hurt, but I ignored it. Then, when we were all about 16, somebody got a hold of liquor and we all sat around drinking. Being intoxicated, we got into a little debate about who's better friends with who, and I was somehow accused of not liking Brianna as much as the other friend because I wouldn't spend much time at her house. Since I had zero filter at the moment, I blurted out, Brianna, it isn't you. It's your dad. He's a kitty fiddler. I can tell just by looking at him. As soon as I said it, everything changed. I apologized. That didn't work, of course. Both of my best girlfriends dumped me that day. I still had a solid best friend, but I had to get myself a new group for sure. Also, they started pestering me a bit, but I just took it because of the horrible thing I said about Brianna's dad. I felt super guilty. 3 years later, I was out of high school, living with my best friend who was still friends with Brianna. I got home from class and there was Brianna sitting on the living room couch. It was so uncomfortable. I decided to try to apologize again. Hey, I know you're probably sick of hearing this, but I'm so very sorry for what I said about your dad, Brianna. Please forgive me. I still don't know why I'd say such a thing. She sort of chuckled and said, it's no big deal. He mistreated all of us. I never questioned my intuition again, because I freaking called it the second I saw that schmuck. There's no party like a freaking Brianna's dad party. Story 3. In Canada, we have a holiday called Family Day in February. In 2008, my wife was dealing with a sick family member out of town and had come back for a visit. They were trying to have a child at the time. Well, with our crazy schedules, we had one chance on Family Day. The moment we were done, I jumped up, gave her the double finger guns, first time in my life, said, bam, you're pregnant. Twin girls, red hair. Turns out I got everything right, except the hair. Her Italian genes beat me in that one. I went for her entire marriage with that prediction. Story 4. Boyfriend's best friend, let's call him John, started asking me for favors and texting me at odd hours of the night. Felt uneasy about John's actions and informed my boyfriend every time I was contacted as soon as it happened. I explained to my boyfriend that John was acting suspiciously and making me uncomfortable, but I couldn't pinpoint why. Cut to a month or so later. John claims I cheated on my boyfriend with John. I freaking knew it. Story 5. In high school, my best friend's little sister, 16 at the time, brought home her new 18-year-old boyfriend from work to meet the family. I was over at the time and talked to him for a while because we were the same age. After meeting him, something was off. I got the impression that number 1, he was much older than he was claiming. Number 2, had been in jail. I wound up saying something to my friend who told his parents and sister. Long story short, the family freaked out on me for spreading rumors that weren't true, telling me to mind my own business, etc. 2 years later, the sister comes home from a day with him in tears. He finally came out and admitted to her that, number 1, he was 30, not the now 20 he was saying. Number 2, he had spent 2 years in prison, but refused to say for what. I was very quick to point out to the family how I called this years earlier and was basically shamed out of their house. Story 6. Caught up with a high school friend on a university campus. Pretty quiet guy, subtle good looks, but never showed any interest in relationships. We were waiting for separate buses when he ran into one of his classmates and she joined us in the bus line. We were having a pretty good conversation, but I saw her eyes repeatedly flickering over to his face. Soon after, my bus pulled up, so I smiled and waved goodbye to my friend and said to the girl, "It was great meeting you. I'm sure I'll see you a lot more in the future." She looked puzzled, but smiled and waved back. They're in a common law marriage now and getting officially married next year. And they've been valuable friends to my fiancé and I for the last 6 years. Bro manifested a friendship. That's crazy. Story 7. My husband is super medically fragile. He's had cancer twice and a bone marrow transplant in the last 9 years. A few years ago, he had surgery on his wrist, and I had a gut feeling he was brewing an infection despite being on antibiotics. The surgeon's office saw him and switched ABX. I contacted the cancer center because I just knew it was going to become more. They blew me off and punted back to the surgeon's office. I knew this was beyond the surgeon's scope. I pitched my tantrumy fit and pretty much told them they were going to see them and I wasn't accepting no for an answer. The triage phone nurse was condescending and telling me it was probably nothing and could wait. We got to the clinic and the nurse there started looking around the incision site. She told me that she believed my gut and pushed to admit him. The CT showed a huge infection that landed him in the hospital for a week and potent IV antibiotics with another surgery to clean out the site. Story 8. When I was a kid shooting off fireworks and supervised, I opened up this big package and pulled out this little ball with a platform on one side. So I put the platform on the ground, lit it, and it explodes. Goes 5 feet into the air and explodes again. Big. Like, that should have been in the sky. Big. I'm surprised I didn't get injured or light anything on fire. So I figure that one must have been a dud, and I light another. I hid behind a car this time. Same thing happens. It's at this point I start looking at the box for directions, because something's clearly not right. Turns out there's a tube in the box which is essentially the cannon for these things. You drop the bomb in the tube, light it, the tube funnels the force to actually shoot it up into the sky and then it explodes again. So I was definitely just exploding sky bombs at ground level. Story 9. My wife was watching some TV show. I happened to walk in during some scene in which it was raining out and a guy and a gal were looking at each other through their car windows as their kid went from one car to the other. I said, "Here comes the scene where they make up." Without knowing any of the background of the show, my wife started telling me that it won't happen. They'd had a failed relationship years earlier, hence the kid, and the woman was with a great guy. Right after she said that, the woman got out and ran to the guy's car, basically professing her love for him. Plot twist, the guy was the writer for the show. Story 10. Oh, crap. Well, I don't want to get into too many details, but I was friends with a kiddie fiddler type. This was a guy who I had celebrated basketball championships with, who I had been to dinners with, who I had gone to parties with, but something felt off. Slight disclosure, I'm working in the youth department of a church at the time, and he's the youth pastor. The "I freaking called it" moment happened when I went to the head pastor to say something is wrong. I think he's messing around with the girls, and I think he's a little unstable, so if someone doesn't put a stop to this, he's going to end up terminating someone. I get kicked out for BS reasons. 1 year later, I'm part of a new church doing good work in the hood and helping raise money, clothing, that sort of thing for disadvantaged people. I got a call from one of the girls from that old church group. Turns out my friend was fooling around with girls and ended up terminating one of them. Guy's in prison now. Want to know my "I freaking called it" moment? Well, I knew there was going to be a dark story in this thread. There you go. Story 11. About a year after my father's death, my mother got together with a man. Felt as if something was off from the start and told her that he didn't seem right and that he was going to do something stupid and hurt her emotionally. A year later, they got engaged and they seemed happy. I've never seen my mother so happy since before my father passed away. Well, as of yesterday, it came out that this man had been engaged to someone else since before my mother met him and that he has been sleeping with at least 2 other women on a regular basis. I wish I could tell her that I had freaking called it, but I'm afraid it will make her more upset. Anyways, now to build my revenge plan. Wish me luck. Oh, another villain backstory. Nice. Story 12. In my first year in college on my level 1 motor vehicle engineering course, we were being taught how to change spark plugs and adjust the timing on engines. So my then friend, we'll call him Ryan, is working with me on a 1998 Audi A3 1.8 non-turbo. We both agreed that I should do the timing as I was more confident about it, which makes little sense thinking about it now, and that he wanted to remove the spark plugs. When he was taking out the first plug, I noticed that he wasn't very careful about it. For those of you who don't know much about cars, spark plugs are made of ceramic and metal, and the ceramic is easy to snap if you're not careful, and when it does, little pieces of ceramic will end up falling inside the cylinder, which, if the car started, can cause serious damage to your engine. Anyways, I tell Ryan that he should be careful about taking out the spark plugs. He just says, nah, man, it's fine. They're made of metal. I don't reply, as I noticed that he didn't give a crap about the job. So he unscrews the second spark plug and pulls really hard as he can't fully undo it, and right there, I hear the spark plug snap in half. And to top it off, the entire ceramic part of the spark plug fell inside the cylinder. I immediately told him to tell the tutor, which he of course didn't. So then after he moves away from the car, our tutor tells us to move the car to a different spot. I give Ryan the keys and say, go on then, as I didn't have my license then. So he gets in and starts the car, and right from the start, me and the tutor can hear that something is knocking inside the engine, and before the tutor could tell Ryan to switch it off, we hear a very loud pop, and the engine stops by itself. Right there and then, out loud, I looked Ryan straight in the eyes and said, I freaking called it, you schmuck. Got kicked off the course since this was an actual teacher's car. Story 13. I still relish that I was right about this. That show, 19 Kids and Counting? Over Thanksgiving, one year, two of my aunts got talking about it and were just raving about how amazing they thought it was and what a great family they had. I pretty much said something to the degree of, nope, that's not normal. Those kids are essentially raising each other, and I guarantee you that something is not right. They completely dismissed me, said I didn't know what I was talking about because I don't watch the show, etc. When the news eventually broke that one was mistreating some of the others, I felt so vindicated. But my absolute favorite moment was the next Thanksgiving, where at the dinner table I got to say, "So, how about that Duggar family, huh?" Complete silence from my aunts, but I had a crap-eating grin on my face from ear to ear. Nothing more satisfying than proving your schmuck relatives wrong. Story 14. At the end of Captain America: The First Avenger, Red Skull is disintegrated by the Tesseract. I always had a weird feeling about how it was done, specifically because it looks almost exactly like the Bifrost magic. I always held that he wasn't disintegrated but was taken somewhere. Cut to Infinity War. Turns out the Tesseract banished him to Vormir, to be the keeper of the Soul Stone for all eternity. During opening night, while everyone was gasping, my single solitary voice involuntarily shouted, "I freaking told you!" Well, comic book rule, nobody ever stays dead. Story 15. Probably too late, but I want to share this anyway. The last few months of my wife's pregnancy with my daughter, the little baby would regularly clockwork. Around 10:30 p.m., put her feet against my wife's and try to straighten her legs so she could headbutt her way out of my wife. Bam! Headbutt to the inside of your whatever. My wife would freaking jump up screaming like a sailor every time. It was painful, but also hilarious, reliable, and I guess we knew she'd been an active little kid well before she was born. Cut to the evening of her birth. The doctor is telling us around 9 p.m. that things are going well, but he's going to go get dinner because he hasn't eaten and there's no way this kid is coming out before midnight. I look at my wife, look at the doc, and say, "Don't go far. The kid is going to deliver herself around 10:30 p.m. I promise you. You're just going to have to catch her." He laughed, told us he's been doing this a long time and he wasn't worried. 10:25, he's rushing in and barely gets his gloves and scrubs on before my daughter shoots herself out of mommy. Direct quote from the doctor looking at me as he holds my little darling. Well, I guess even I can still learn things. I don't blame him at all. Who would believe parents about something like that? But that kid had done so many test runs on such a regular schedule, I knew there was no stopping her. And fair game. Getting headbutted daily for a month or whatever is a trade-off to have a very short and easy labor. There are worse deals. Turns out we got a boxer in the making. Story 16. Found out my now ex-husband was sleeping with a coworker. So naturally, we divorce, but still have to keep in contact because we have a daughter. Well, her fiancé finds out and leaves her as well. Now she's a decade older than me and had mentioned that she and her ex-fiancé had been trying for a baby for a long time but never conceived. He continued to see her and eventually she moved in with him. He didn't want any more kids. I told him to be careful because I suspected she was only with him to have a baby. Fast forward a year and she's pregnant. He comes to terms with that after being slightly upset. Fast forward a year after the baby was born and she breaks up with him. Shocker. Story 17. This is my best and worst called it moment. I was sitting in biology class in high school when I heard sirens outside and looked outside the window to see an ambulance rushing past. I thought to myself, that's headed in the direction of my grandma's house, even though there were a plethora of other streets it could have turned on. Looking back, it was only even vaguely heading in that direction. I had the thought because my grandma had a heart attack a year prior. I got word a few hours later that it did in fact head to my grandparents' house. Only it was for my aunt who was staying with them. She was terminated outside their house by her ex-boyfriend. I'm still not sure why I thought the ambulance was heading there, but being correct sucked. Story 18. Not me, but two of my friends, M and D. Our other friend, R, got married to a woman he'd been seeing for about 3 years. M and D were talking about it, and they agreed that R would go through a midlife crisis, leave his wife, and shack up with someone new after having kids. This was in 2008. 6 months ago, R texted me saying he'd left his wife and 2 kids and needed a place to crash. He's met someone else. I told M of this, and he uttered the words, "I called it." Not something to be proud of, buddy, but sure. Story 19. My company, MC, had a contract with a big Fortune 500 company, F5. I was head of one of the departments. Kept raising flags that the contract was at risk due to changing F5 policies. Was told not to worry about it. MC boss got distracted by and married a foreign who lived across the country. Stopped paying attention to MC. Asked me to do a specific thing to cover up the internal problems we were having. I said no disrespect meant, but I already tried that. It didn't work. So I'm not wasting time to try it again when I'm overworked as it was. Got fired for insubordination. Told MC good luck with the contract. They didn't have a chance without me. F5 company was furious. They got contact with the department I used to head 6 months early and with the entire company when it came up for renewal. MC has been through about 6 rounds of massive layoffs since then and is struggling to pay their bills. F5 company hired me directly for a $15K raise doing basically exactly the same job. I tried to warn MC. Story 20. This girl worked a mid-level position at one of 10 of our office locations. I was a higher up, so it was a different location every day, busting heads. It was always at the one location. I'd been there a couple times over the prior month, but had no memory of the girl. Me and her and 2 other colleagues shared a taxi home after work. When she got to talking, it was just an absolute firecracker. I didn't know her name, but something about her caught my attention. She laughed a lot, she talked loud, she was shameless, and I remember thinking, I want to marry this girl, which was crazy since, at the time, I decided to be single for life. I didn't see her or end up back at that office location for a month, and she called me randomly one night. No idea where she got my number. And as soon as she said who she was, and explained who she was, since I didn't know her name, I was like, it's happening. I'm definitely going to marry this girl. We talked for an hour, met up the night, and a year later, we were married. 6th anniversary last March, and we have a 2-year-old. Good Lord. When? Story 21. Back in March, I was driving home for lunch. I live in a place with snow during winter, and we had a decent snowfall, followed by a warm day. Anyways, as I'm driving, some idiot turns in front of me with a 6-inch layer of snow on their roof. I wished with my whole heart that they would suffer consequences for their stupidity. Fast forward 5 minutes, and all the snow cascades down into their windshield as they attempt to roll a stop sign. I relish pointing and laughing as I drove around them while they had to switch to park, get out of the vehicle, and try to brush off all the snow in a live lane. Story 22. After breaking up with my first girlfriend, she rebounded with a very sketchy dude at her work. Within a month, he was living with her, and she had become a completely different person. I tried warning her. She was being gaslit and manipulated. Her friends tried, but the dude had his teeth sunk in too deep. After 6 months, he dropped the act and made up an elaborate story about his mother, who he had previously said passed away of cancer, having faked her passing and being alive in California. So he left for a week, at which point he stopped all contact with my ex. She panicked and came to me saying she was worried, and within days, this entire construction felt like a house of cards. My ex was devastated. I was too angry to be vindicated. I broke up with her, but still cared for her. I spent about 3 months following up with her and taking care of her until she was able to be on her own again. The events themselves were traumatic and awful, but the feeling I got from knowing I wasn't wrong about him, and that it proved to my ex she could still trust me and be my friend, was worth it. We're still best friends today. Story 23. My brother had a girlfriend who was really freaking lazy. They were on and off for a long time, and on their last break, she came back 3 months later saying she was pregnant. Everyone believed it was my brother's baby except me. So for the next 6 months of the pregnancy, I doubted her, and everyone kept calling me insensitive and mean because I was open about my doubts. When the baby came out 6 months later, it reinforced my doubts because the baby came out brown with straight hair. Everyone in my family has really curly hair. So does my brother, and also, my brother is a real pale white guy. Even then, no one thought that maybe it wasn't his. So when the baby was almost a year old, they decided to do a paternity test, and guess what? It was not his baby. We were all in the living room at home when we got the news, and of course, being the gentleman that I am, I probably stood up and threw it in everyone's face. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 24. Let me preface this by saying that my dad was kind of a macho military nut. I mean, he used to be. Apparently, he was kind of cool and went on a million tours with his army buddies, but I didn't really know him like that. He was always a pretty chill, peaceful guy when I was growing up, so I saw his weapon collection as a sort of relic of his past. I wasn't really allowed to touch any of his stuff as he kept it locked away, except for one particular weapon or gift. More on this in a moment. He gave it to me as a sort of symbol of my entrance into adulthood, and when he eventually passed away, it became the only real heirloom I had to remember him by. Anyway, I noticed that whenever I hung out with one of my closest friends, he'd always be eyeing this thing. Even if we were just sitting around, it felt like he wanted to take it and swing it around like it was a toy. I explicitly told him that it was special to me and it really wasn't meant for other people to play with. He assured me that he wasn't interested at all, but I could never shake the feeling that he was going to just snag it while I wasn't looking. I even asked him one day if he wanted to hold it just to get it out of his system, but the dude pretended like this wasn't even an option. So of course, the other day, while we're each doing our own thing in the yard, I get distracted for just a moment and I see my goddamn hammer flying through the air. The guy just ups and takes it, then swings it around like he owns the thing. I knew it. I thought you had to be worthy to hold that thing. Story 25. Oh boy, do I have a good story for this one. In college, I went to a theme park with my then boyfriend, right before I moved away to California. We decided to break up as he didn't want to do long distance. Mostly his decision. He had driven us in his SUV, his really bad eyesight, and I just got brand new glasses. I believe they cost about $400. As we're going up the stairs in line for a roller coaster, I said, "Hey, why don't you give me your glasses and I'll stick them in my purse?" He said, "Nah, it'll be fine." And I said, "Are you sure? We're making a $400 bet where if you win, you just get to keep what you already have." And he said, "The forward momentum of the roller coaster will keep them on my face." So I thought, he's an adult, whatever. Literally first drop of the roller coaster, I hear him yell over the roar of the wind, "Do you have my glasses?" So we spent the next hour walking around the base of the roller coaster looking for them and leaving a report at the Lost and Found booth. I then had to drive us home in his SUV, which I'd never driven before. He had to attempt to navigate while practically blind. So yeah, still pretty smug about that one. Story 26. I was instrumental in creating the theater club at my high school. I was president all 4 years and put my heart and soul into it. My second semester senior year, I took a step back to allow for others to step up in preparation for next year. Throughout this process, I'd gotten close with our faculty advisor, and he and I were talking about leadership positions for the following year. He decided that his favorite actor should be the next president. I had the opposite opinion. She was self-centered and had no ability to plan or lead. So she was great on stage, she shouldn't be the next president. He, however, overruled me and announced her as the next president. After this, he also refused to acknowledge any of my hard work and dedication over the years as an additional screw you to me. Around Christmas the next year, I heard he was fired and facing criminal charges because the person he picked had falsely accused him and he's no longer allowed to teach or work at schools. If only he had listened. Story 27. First time I met my brother's wife. She spent 3 hours ragging and complaining about my brother. Had a gut feeling about her and everyone told me to give her a chance. 2 years later, an untold manipulative, witchy, emotional, and cruel crap later, she calls a restraining order on my brother. Claimed he was mistreating her and wanted a divorce. The judge threw the restraining order out and my brother showed up with audio recording of her verbally destroying him, etc. Tried to back out of divorce and my brother didn't let her. So now he's got a beautiful little girl and another on the way with a psycho in the middle of a divorce. So yeah, freaking knew she was off from day one. Everyone told me to back off. Called it. Story 28. In very early January 2010, I was ripped and watched a Blackhawks game for the first time in a while, since they had been so bad during the mid-2000s that I just couldn't bear to watch it. Barely even halfway through the season for those who don't follow the sport too much. I don't know, I was super impressed and blown away. Got on Twitter after the game and was like, that's it, the Blackhawks are winning the Stanley Cup. It was the first time I ever felt that way since I started following them in the early 90s. 6 months later, they were skating the cup around the rink. The second time was me figuring out that they won that year because that's the year my kid was born. So when my second kid was born in 2013, I figured they had to win again. And they did. Story 29. My friend was going to bomb a hill on a skateboard. The hill was steep, but the road was very good and new, so he rolled very smoothly. Anyway, he was going to try to go down the hill. He doesn't wear a helmet often, which I knew, but I reminded him that he should really wear a helmet this time. He told me he was going to make it without one, so I said, dude, you're going to run into something head first or something. He responded with a mocking chuckle. Then he got on his board and started rolling down the hill. It was then I realized how stupid he was. He had no helmet, no kneecaps, no wrist protectors, no nothing. I also remembered that he has never bombed a hill this steep before, and right as that freaking thought hit me, he leaned to his right a little too much and at full speed, rammed into someone's garbage bin, which was full. His face went full speed into the bin. The trash can fell over and he rolled over it, hitting his head on the ground. I called an ambulance just to make sure he was fine. He was fine. Story 30. There was this dumb movie about monkeys in space advertised on TV when I was a kid. I told my sister I'd bet her anything that would make that stupid movie into a video game, and she was like, they would not. It's too stupid. I said they would too. I'll bet you they will. If I win, you have to drink a can of V8, which every 10-year-old knows is fate worse than passing away. She was like, yeah, sure, okay. They started advertising the Space Monkey video game based off the movie a few months later. I was like, I so freaking called it. Jumping out of my freaking chair. Yeah, suck it, I was right. She refused to drink the V8, but I'm still holding on to it as one of the only times I ever got to be right about something. Story 31. This is actually my brother, not me. He was in high school, probably around 14 to 15, and I was in middle school. We were with our mom at the car dealership getting her car's oil changed. It seemed to take forever back then, so it felt like we were there for hours. Meanwhile, the only thing to entertain ourselves was the TV in the waiting room, which was on the local news. Our state governor was doing some kind of press conference that afternoon, but this was before there was a ton of news online all the time, so we had no idea what it was about. My brother heard just the first bit and immediately said, oh, he's definitely having an affair. My mom was adamant that he was wrong. After an hour of weaseling around the issue, our governor announced his resignation because he had been caught having an affair and using taxpayer money to travel his mistress in South America, I think. Still hilarious to me how well-tuned my brother's sleaze meter must have been, lol. And I'm sure it would be super obvious now to see the guy just talking in circles and trying to deflect blame. But at the time, nobody could believe he would do something like that. Story 32. Most people wouldn't see this as satisfying, which you'll understand why, but to me, I was greatly relieved to know my intuition is intact. Dating girl F for about 7 months. One random day after school, I talked to girl B for about 10 minutes. This is the first time B and I had talked in months, and we didn't talk again for a while after that. However, best bud Z comes up and goes, "What are you doing? You're dating F." I'm like, "Yeah, and?" B and I were just talking, that's all. Z storms off and says, "Whatever, man." I think to myself, great, that's the end of that relationship. Z just wants to ask out F anyway. Sure enough, following a week of absolutely unnecessary BS drama, F and I broke up. Z asks out F literally the next day. Story 33. I don't know about satisfying, but y'all remember the runaway bride? Not the movie, the actual woman? Well, there was a woman who was taken before her wedding, maybe a couple days before if I'm not mistaken, and the whole world started looking for her. If I remember correctly, she was able to make a phone call to her family and she told them she was taken by some Mexicans. As soon as she said that, I knew she was lying. Whenever people specify a race when explaining a crime, my ears perk up, but I understand why she did it. People will believe it. Either way, my girlfriend at the time got so mad at me, saying, "You always think you know it all. This woman was taken and all you can do is think of something to be right about? Have some compassion." A couple days later, guess who shows up? Apparently, she didn't want to get married and decided to get taken rather than call it off. Luckily, the state made her pay back all the money they spent to search for her. But, of course, no jail time. I never said, "I freaking told you so" to my girlfriend, but I know she was waiting for it by how she was acting. Didn't speak much, acted aloof, so we never spoke of it after. In The Notebook, as soon as the movie started, I was like, oh, so they have Alzheimer's. Am I the only one who saw that coming? And an old man that we don't know goes to read to a random woman every day? Yeah, to be fair, I knew about The Notebook. Story 34. My coworker didn't like the new boss we had to transition under. From day one, my coworker was openly insubordinate, talking crap about the new boss behind their back, but the thing that put it over the top for me was the day she came into our break room bragging that new boss had asked her to do something, and she'd handed the new boss back a sticky note with a number of who to call in order to resolve the situation. Coworker was convinced she was invaluable and wouldn't be let go because all of her clients love her so much. They don't. The worst part was that she hated new boss so much she brought the whole vibe of the workplace down to a hellhole. Every day there was something new to bitch about. We were all just venting receptacles to her. Even though I consider her a friend, I was quietly beginning to pray for the day our boss had enough. I told my good friends that worked with us, "Yep, she's gonna get fired." And sure enough, a few months later, she was let go. When she told me, she called the office crying on the phone and I could barely muster an "I'm sorry" because I was so relieved that I wouldn't have to work with her anymore. Oh my god, who knew being a schmuck to your boss would get you fired? Crazy. Story 35. I would often hear scraping of furniture over the floor in the studio apartment above mine, sometimes in the middle of the night. It had kept me up a few times, but as I didn't have anything going on at the time, it didn't bother me that much. I did once knock on her door to ask what was going on. She apologized and stopped that night. However, for about a month, I had to get up at 7 a.m. during the week, so I knocked on her door and politely asked if she could stop doing it after 11 in the evening. She said okay. There was some loud talking going on in the hallway. Sign at the bottom floor clearly states absolute silence in the hallways. Went upstairs and knocked on the door opposite to hers just after it closed. It was her again, and the guy who owns the room. They didn't approach it too well. She got mad and brought up an issue she had with me. Fine, that was fair enough. But then she proceeded to claim I haven't done it in months, and okay, I won't do it again. Both of which were obviously BS. I started to think with the insane amount of cleaning going on that she had some form of OCD. Friend came over, told me he used to date her. I didn't want to mention it, but I was able to put it together and ask about the OCD thing, which he confirmed. And we're not talking about OCD the way that people use it. Actually diagnosed OCD. At that point, I felt pretty conflicted. I felt completely vindicated and was mad at her lies. On the other hand, I know how difficult the issue can be and how hard it probably is to be confronted about it by someone who's mostly a stranger. Story 36. This is kind of bleak, but definitely one of these moments. I have one bio sibling and lots of step ones, an older brother. He's always been a freaking monster. Narcissistic, cruel, unpredictable, threatening, etc. Just all around an awful person who treated me like garbage the entire time we were growing up. We were always shuttling between our divorced parents' houses, so even when one family got a break, I was always with him. Every time I tried to point out that he was awful to an extreme degree, particularly to me, I was told, "He's your brother. Brothers pick on their sisters. He's just doing it to get a rise out of you. Ignore him. You're being too sensitive. He's your brother and you have to love him." Years go by. He and I live in different states, and even though occasionally I'm forced by people like my grandma to spend time with him, I generally just text him once every few months to assuage my bad sister guilt, but continue to really genuinely believe he's a bad, cruel person, which I know from firsthand experience. I make no effort to see him, ever. One day, my dad calls me and says they found out through his old roommate, who's been trying to find him so she can get the rent she's owed, that he has been missing for months. Turns out the FBI raided their apartment and confiscated all his electronics because he was under suspicion for distributing. They eventually discovered through credit card records that he's somewhere in Montenegro. I was like, hey fam, I hate to say I told you so, but I freaking told y'all so. He's not just mean, he's evil. That was in 2016, and I have not seen or heard from him since. Hope I never do. Story 37. I was sitting in my car, waiting for one of my friends when it started raining. He came into the car and he wanted to drive. I sat in the passenger seat, thinking he was going to avoid the highway, just in case of traffic and possible accidents. He decided that he was going to go on the highway and said that it would be quicker. I told him, there's probably an accident that will hold us for a while. We should just go through town. Why risk it when we can get home way faster? He shrugged me off and pulled up onto the highway. Traffic was fine for a while, and he was feeling pretty good about himself. The car in front of us started going pretty fast to pass a car in the passing lane and swerved back over into the other lane and slowed down, almost to a complete stop. The new car in front of us, the one that got past, couldn't slow down fast enough and rammed directly into the back of the car in front of it. We swerved out of the way in time to avoid a crash. I started laughing, thinking to myself, I freaking called it. Story 38. I had a main friend group in my undergrad college days. It was me, C, G, and A. We ate lunch and dinner together. Mostly dinner since our schedules were all so crazy, but C decided to bring a new friend in. It was all right. We didn't mind adding people to our friend group since we all felt a bit lonely anyways, so we welcomed her. After the first initial meeting, me, A, and G all agreed that C's new friend was a bit off or weird. C defended her and told us we were being too judgmental. Okay, maybe we were, so we let her stay in the friend group. She would later be caught up in a ton of lies and drama that supersede anyone I've ever met. She lied about having her leg broken and she even walked in a cast. She lied about her family dying. She lied about having a termination. She would bring dudes around her group and get on the dudes' laps. She would ask us weird questions like, what kind of friend do you guys consider to be a good friend? I want to really be a part of your friend group. It was sad. Completely sad, and she was so delusional. We felt bad for her, but at the same time, me, G, and A did not want to hang out with her. Eventually, C and her left their friend group. C came back a year later telling us she was sorry and she now sees what we were talking about. She told us about what happened with her and the other girl, and me, G, and A were all like, we told you. We didn't tell her that we all talked about it and said, didn't we tell her? So yeah, it was quite satisfying to see her friend come back to us. It wasn't that the new girl was a liar and such, but on top of it all, her old group of friends who she was super close with came to us and told us she was crazy and to stay away from her. They told us she made up a bunch of stories and lies and would eventually lure us into a dangerous situation just like she did to them. That's when I knew we had to leave this witch behind. Story 39. In my friend group, there's one girl who was always sort of the little sister to us. She was a long-term girlfriend of one of the guys and he ended up cheating on her. She hung around and has been one of my best friends for 7 to 8 years now. Anyways, she has a boyfriend for about a year or two that absolutely none of us liked. He was pretentious, annoying, didn't have a job and full-on mooched off of her. It was just really not fun to have around. Anyways, a few months into dating him, my friend complained that she was having relationship problems and her boyfriend never wanted to have intimacy. She's a good-looking girl and I told her it could be plenty of things and not to worry. About 6 months later, she told me the same thing, that it had been 2 to 3 months since they had intimacy. I told her that he was gay. She got offended and adamantly denied it. About 2 weeks later, she showed up at my house damn near in shock. She got suspicious and went through his phone. She found a video of him fiddling that was sent to John. She accused him of cheating and asked who John really was, assuming it was a girl. Nope, it was John. Normally, it would have felt worse about the whole situation, but the guy was a complete piece of crap. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.